What if true freedom doesn't come from discovering who you are, but from understanding what you can become? The teachings of the Buddha invite us to look beyond labels, beyond illusions of identity, and into the heart of what it means to truly live. The mind, luminous, creative, and ever-changing, But what is the mind? Is it inherently good or bad? How do we use it to find peace, even in the chaos of modern life? Today, we'll journey into one of Buddhism's most profound concepts, Buddha nature. Through ancient wisdom, relatable stories, and transformative insights, we'll uncover how the teachings on the mind and freedom can help us break free from suffering and live with clarity and purpose. Part 1. What is Buddha nature? In the Buddha's teachings, the mind is described as luminous, capable of clarity and transformation. Yet, this luminosity is often obscured, like the sun hidden by clouds. The Buddha did not define the mind as inherently good or bad, but emphasized its potential. It is neither a fixed nature nor a preordained destiny. Instead, it's what recognizes good and evil, what creates them, and ultimately what lets them go. The term Buddha nature often sparks curiosity. Is it something we are born with? Or is it a state we cultivate? In some later Buddhist traditions, it is seen as an innate quality, a spark of awakening that exists in everyone. However, the Buddha himself focused not on inherent qualities but on actions and choices. For him, the path to enlightenment was not about discovering something pre-existing within us, but about shaping and training the mind through deliberate practice. To illustrate this, imagine a sculptor with a block of marble. The sculptor doesn't assume the statue is already inside the stone, waiting to be revealed. Instead, they carve it out, piece by piece, with skill, effort, and patience. The same is true of the mind. Its potential for awakening is real, but it must be uncovered through practice, through discernment, relinquishment, and the pursuit of peace. The Buddha compared the mind's possibilities to a fortress with a single gate. To enter the fortress of awakening, one must pass through this gate. The path is clear but not easy. It requires us to abandon the 5 hindrances: desire, aversion, sloth, restlessness, and doubt. It asks us to develop the 7 factors of awakening: mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. This fortress analogy reminds us that awakening is accessible to all, but it's not automatic. No one is locked out, but neither is anyone carried in without effort. The choice is ours, moment by moment, to walk this path. By focusing on intentional actions, the Buddha reframed the mind's role in awakening. It's not about waiting for some hidden Buddha nature to emerge. It's about cultivating the conditions for transformation. Much like planting and tending a seed, with the right effort, the mind can become luminous again, free from the defilements that obscure its true potential. This is where the journey begins, with the realization that freedom isn't something found but something created. Part 2. The Fortress and the Gatekeeper. The Buddha once shared a powerful analogy to answer a question about enlightenment. A Brahmin asked, "Will all people attain liberation, or only a few?" The Buddha remained silent, not offering a direct answer. His disciple, Nanda, sensing the Brahmin's confusion, stepped in to clarify the Buddha's silence. He shared a metaphor about a fortress, with a single gate through which anyone wishing to enter must pass. Imagine a wise gatekeeper who stands at the fortress, walking around it, inspecting the walls and gates, He knows that the fortress has only one entrance, one gate, and though he cannot foresee how many people will enter, he knows that the ones who do will enter only through this gate. The gatekeeper's wisdom lies not in predicting the future but in understanding the nature of the path. In the same way, the Buddha didn't focus on how many would attain awakening. What mattered to him was the path, the gate through which all who would awaken must pass. It wasn't about a predetermined outcome. It was about the conscious decision to enter through the gate by following the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's approach was grounded in the idea of freedom of choice. This is a key principle of his teachings. Freedom is not the absence of conditions, but the power to choose how we respond to those conditions. The future, the Buddha said, is not set in stone. The number of people who will reach awakening is not preordained. Each person is free to choose whether they will walk the path of awakening or not. This is where the profound lesson lies. If everything were preordained, there would be no point in teaching the path to liberation. If some people were destined to awaken and others were not, the Buddha would have had no need to offer a way out. No need for a path. But freedom exists. Awakening is not a matter of fate or chance, it is the result of our own intentional actions. The Buddha understood that liberation is available to anyone who chooses it. But it's not guaranteed. It's not automatic. Even after one takes the first steps, what is called stream entry, the initial glimpse of enlightenment, there are still choices to be made. These choices will either speed up or slow down the process of awakening. It's like climbing a mountain. The higher you go, the clearer the view. But you still have to continue climbing. Step by step. Every day. Freedom, therefore, is the key. The path to liberation is always open. But it requires intentional, mindful action. The gate to enlightenment is available to all. But no one will pass through it unless they decide to walk the path with determination. Part 3. A story of transformation. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled in the mountains, there was a young monk named Ananda. Ananda was diligent in his practice, but he struggled deeply with feelings of anger, frustration, and doubt. Despite his efforts, his mind seemed clouded, restless, and far from the peace he sought. He often wondered, is awakening even possible for someone like me? Can my mind ever be truly free? One day, his teacher, a wise elder monk, called him to sit with him by a quiet river. The teacher noticed Ananda's troubled expression and decided it was time for a lesson. Ananda, the teacher said, do you see the river flowing here? It has been flowing for centuries. Yet the water never clings to itself. It flows naturally, allowing whatever comes to pass. It doesn't fight the rocks or the mud, it simply moves through everything, untouched by what it passes. Ananda nodded, but still seemed uncertain. The teacher continued, your mind, like this river, has the potential to flow freely. The clouds of anger, doubt, and fear are like debris in the river. They seem to block the flow, but they are not permanent. Just like the clouds that eventually move away, so too can your defilements dissolve. But the key is to let go of them, to stop clinging to them. Ananda sat quietly, reflecting on his teacher's words. He understood that the emotions and doubts he was struggling with were not permanent stains on his mind but temporary clouds passing through. They were a part of his experience, but they were not who he was. That evening, he sat in meditation by the river. As he focused on his breath, he noticed his anger rising, like a storm within him. But this time, instead of pushing it away or trying to control it, he simply observed it. He let it be. Without judgment. Without attachment. Slowly, the storm passed. The water of his mind became clear again. He realized that his thoughts and emotions, no matter how powerful, were impermanent. He could allow them to come and go without letting them define him. From that moment on, Ananda began to understand the truth of the Buddha's teachings. His practice was no longer about trying to force the mind into submission, but about observing it with patience and kindness. He learned to see his anger not as a permanent flaw in his character, but as a passing wave in the vast ocean of his consciousness. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but over time, Ananda began to experience more moments of peace, clarity, and insight. He came to understand that true freedom wasn't about controlling the mind, it was about letting go of what wasn't serving him. It was about releasing the need to cling to the thoughts and emotions that caused suffering and embracing the present moment with mindfulness and compassion. Part 4. What holds us back? The Buddha once described the mind as luminous, yet stained with defilements that come and go. This is an important statement because it reveals a fundamental truth about the mind: it is not inherently broken or flawed. At its core, the mind is capable of clarity, peace, and wisdom, but it is often clouded by the stains of attachment, greed, hatred, and ignorance. These defilements obscure the mind's natural luminosity. Much like dust on a mirror, the dust doesn't belong to the mirror, but it covers its surface, preventing us from seeing clearly. Just as the mirror has the potential to reflect clearly when cleaned, the mind, too, has the inherent capacity to return to its original clarity when the defilements are removed. But the key is in how we remove them. The Buddha taught that these stains, or defilements, are not permanent. They are temporary, arising and passing away based on conditions. And these conditions are often a result of our own actions and attachments. Take a moment and reflect. How often do we find ourselves clinging to thoughts, feelings, or experiences? How often do we get caught in cycles of desire or aversion, trying to hold on to what we like and push away what we don't? These attachments are like the dust on the mirror. They block the mind's natural clarity. But the Buddha didn't leave us with just this diagnosis. He offered a solution. The solution isn't to try to make the mind perfect or to force out the impurities. It's about observing them without attachment. Just as dust can be wiped away from a mirror, our defilements can be released by recognizing them for what they are, passing mental states, not who we are. This is where mindfulness and meditation play a critical role. When we meditate, we develop the ability to observe our thoughts and emotions without becoming entangled in them. We see them as they arise and pass, without grasping onto them or pushing them away. This process is liberating, because it breaks the cycle of attachment that causes suffering. Imagine walking through a dense forest. The trees are thick, and the path is unclear. But with each step, you start to clear a small area, pushing away the branches, opening up space to see more clearly. Over time, the path becomes clearer, and you are able to walk more freely. This is how meditation works. It's not about forcing the mind to be quiet, but about clearing away the distractions and defilements so that the natural clarity of the mind can emerge. But it's not just about mindfulness. It's also about understanding the nature of our attachments. The Buddha taught that all suffering arises from craving, or tanha, the desire for things to be other than they are. Whether it's craving for pleasure, craving for approval, or even craving for the idea of Buddha nature itself. These desires bind us. They make us chase after something outside of ourselves, thinking it will bring us fulfillment. when in reality, it only brings more suffering. The path to freedom, then, is the path of relinquishment, the letting go of attachment to what is fleeting and the embrace of what is eternal, peace, wisdom, and compassion. When we relinquish our attachment to fleeting desires and outcomes, we begin to experience freedom, not from the world itself, but from our reaction to it. Part 5. The Path to True Freedom. The Buddha's teachings on freedom center around one simple but profound truth. True freedom comes not from escaping the world, but from transforming how we relate to it. It is not about running away from our difficulties or desires, but about facing them with mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. The path to true freedom is about liberation from the mental habits and attachments that bind us to suffering. This path is not a one-time achievement. It's a continuous practice, a series of intentional actions that shape the mind, moment by moment. Every choice we make can either lead us closer to freedom or deepen our attachment to suffering. The Buddha taught that the mind is like a garden. It needs to be tended to with care. If we leave it untended, weeds of greed, hatred, and ignorance will sprout and overtake it. But with consistent practice, we can cultivate a beautiful garden of wisdom, peace, and compassion. One of the key teachings the Buddha shared about the path to true freedom is the importance of discernment, the ability to see things as they really are. Discernment involves understanding the nature of our thoughts, emotions, and experiences, and recognizing that they are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. When we truly see the impermanence of everything, we realize that nothing is worth clinging to. Our desires, fears, and attachments are not permanent, they arise and fade away. And we are free to choose how we relate to them. Consider the analogy of a house built on sand. If we try to build our happiness and security on the shifting sands of desire, aversion, and attachment, we are setting ourselves up for inevitable collapse. But when we build our house on solid ground, on the wisdom of impermanence, the truth of suffering, and the nature of not-self, our foundation is unshakable. The Buddha did not promise that the path to freedom would be easy. It requires effort, patience, and dedication. But the key is in the direction we choose. The first step on the path is to recognize that we have the power to choose. Every moment is an opportunity to practice. In each moment, we can choose to act from wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness rather than from our habitual impulses. This is where the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path come into play. The Four Noble Truths offer us a clear understanding of the nature of suffering, its causes, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. The Eightfold Path provides the practical steps we can take to move in the direction of freedom: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Each of these steps is a part of the larger path. A path that begins with a shift in our perception and culminates in the realization of true peace and freedom. The Buddha taught that freedom is not the absence of suffering, but the end of our attachment to it. It's about learning to live in harmony with the ever-changing nature of life, accepting what is, and letting go of the need to control or resist. In the final stages of the path, when we cultivate deep concentration and insight, we begin to experience a profound peace that transcends all mental fabrications. This peace is not an escape, it is the natural result of seeing clearly. It is the peace that arises when the mind no longer clings to ideas of self, to desires, or to fears. This peace is what the Buddha described as nibbana, the end of all mental afflictions. The ultimate freedom. Part 6. The power of choice and freedom. One of the most transformative aspects of the Buddha's teachings is the power of choice. The Buddha taught that we are not prisoners of our past or victims of our circumstances, rather, we have the capacity to choose our responses, our actions, and ultimately, the course of our lives. This power to choose is not just a philosophical idea, but a practical, transformative tool for breaking free from suffering and moving toward liberation. The mind is incredibly powerful. It shapes our experience of the world, influencing how we perceive everything from our relationships to our desires, fears, and emotions. And yet, the Buddha reminded us that the mind is not fixed, it is fluid, ever-changing, and incredibly responsive to our intentions. Every moment presents us with a new opportunity to choose. Will we act from ignorance, clinging to our desires and aversions? Or will we act from wisdom, choosing what leads to peace and freedom? Imagine you're walking through a dense forest. The trees are thick, and the path is unclear. At first, it seems like there's no way out. But with each step you take, you start to see the gaps between the trees. You begin to notice the path unfolding before you. The more you walk, the clearer the path becomes. It's the same with the mind. When we start making conscious, wise choices, the path to freedom begins to reveal itself. It doesn't happen all at once, but gradually, step by step. The Buddha taught that freedom arises when we recognize that our thoughts and actions are not determined by external conditions, but by our internal choices. We can choose to react to a situation with anger or with patience, with fear or with courage. These choices, though seemingly small, shape the course of our lives. Each act of mindfulness, each decision to act with kindness or understanding, builds a new foundation for freedom. At the heart of this process is mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions in the present moment, without judgment or attachment. Mindfulness is like the light that illuminates the path ahead. It allows us to see clearly, to recognize where we are holding onto harmful patterns, and to make a conscious choice to let them go. Mindfulness also reveals the truth of impermanence. When we are fully present in the moment, we begin to see that everything, our thoughts, emotions, experiences, is constantly changing. What we experience today will not be the same tomorrow. This recognition of impermanence is liberating, because it frees us from clinging to things that are fleeting. It reminds us that nothing in this world, no matter how painful or joyful, can last forever. And in this understanding, we find freedom. Freedom is not about being passive or resigned. It's not about waiting for life to change or for someone else to rescue us. True freedom comes when we take responsibility for our choices and our actions. It comes when we realize that we have the power to shape our minds and our lives. This realization is what allows us to transcend suffering, not by escaping from the world, but by transforming our relationship to it. The Buddha's path is not an escape from life, it's a way to live life fully, with awareness, compassion, and wisdom. By making wise choices, we gradually break the chains of desire, aversion, and ignorance that bind us. We become more free with each step, choosing peace over conflict, wisdom over confusion, and love over fear. Part 7. The Path of Relinquishment and Letting Go. One of the core teachings of the Buddha is the practice of relinquishment, the act of letting go. This is not about renouncing life or withdrawing from the world, but rather, it is about releasing the attachments that keep us bound to suffering. In Buddhism, Attachment is seen as the root of all suffering. And the path to freedom involves gradually loosening our grip on everything we cling to. Letting go isn't easy. We cling to desires, opinions, relationships, and even ideas about who we are. These attachments create a sense of identity, and they seem to offer us security. But in reality, they create an endless cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. The Buddha taught that true freedom comes when we release our attachment to all things, including our thoughts, feelings, and the very idea of a permanent, fixed self. To understand this concept more deeply, think about how we relate to our possessions. If you hold onto something tightly, even when you no longer need it, it weighs you down. It occupies space in your life and requires energy to maintain. In the same way, our attachments to certain ideas, emotions, or desires drain our energy and limit our potential for freedom. We keep chasing after things that offer temporary satisfaction, only to find ourselves unsatisfied again and again. But when we practice relinquishment, we begin to experience the truth that everything is impermanent, everything arises and fades away, including our attachments. The Buddha didn't ask us to forcefully eliminate desires or attachments, but to simply observe them and recognize that they are temporary. When we see that something is transient, we no longer hold onto it so tightly. We learn to release it and allow it to flow naturally, like a leaf floating down a stream. The practice of relinquishment is tied to the concept of non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean indifference or detachment from life, but rather, it means being free from the need to possess or control. It means allowing life to unfold as it will, without desperately trying to control the outcome. When we let go of our attachment to specific outcomes, we open ourselves to the natural flow of life. And in that flow, we find peace. To practice relinquishment, we must first cultivate mindfulness, the ability to observe the present moment without clinging to it. Mindfulness allows us to see the arising and passing of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. It gives us the space to acknowledge them without becoming consumed by them. When we recognize that all things are in constant flux, we can begin to loosen our grip on them. For example, if you experience anger or frustration, mindfulness allows you to notice it without becoming identified with it. You can observe the sensation of anger, feel it in your body, and acknowledge its presence. But mindfulness gives you the ability to choose how to respond, whether to let it control you or to simply let it pass by, knowing it is not permanent. Relinquishment is also deeply connected to wisdom. It's not enough to simply let go. We must understand why we are letting go. The Buddha taught that we relinquish attachment because it is the source of our suffering. When we hold on to things that are impermanent, we are bound to experience disappointment, fear, and pain. But when we release our grip on them, we open ourselves to the freedom of simply being. We no longer seek happiness in external things, but instead cultivate an inner peace that doesn't rely on conditions. As we practice relinquishment, we begin to experience a sense of liberation. The mind becomes lighter, and the burden of attachment begins to fade. In the stillness of the mind, we find that what we were searching for, peace, clarity, and freedom, was already within us all along. It was just hidden beneath the layers of attachment. The Buddha's path of relinquishment is not a rejection of life, but a way of fully embracing it without being enslaved by it. It's about releasing the need to control, the need to hold on, and the need to define ourselves by our desires. In letting go, we find a deeper connection to the present moment, to others, and to ourselves. Part 8. Training for Peace, the final stage of the path. As we continue along the path of liberation, we reach the final, yet essential stage, training for peace. This is the ultimate goal of the Buddha's teachings, achieving a state of inner peace that transcends the turbulence of our daily experiences. This peace is not an escape from life, but a profound transformation in how we engage with it. Training for peace is the process of refining the mind until it is no longer disturbed by external circumstances, desires, or fears. It's about cultivating an unshakable tranquility that can endure through life's inevitable ups and downs. This kind of peace isn't passive or complacent, it is active and vigilant, rooted in the wisdom and mindfulness developed along the path. The Buddha's own awakening was characterized by a deep sense of peace, one that was undisturbed by the chaos and suffering in the world. This peace, known as nibbana, is the highest form of liberation. It is the cessation of all suffering and craving, the complete end of the mental afflictions that cloud our judgment and lead us astray. To train for peace is to make this peace a reality in our own minds, not just as an abstract concept but as a lived experience. One of the primary tools for training the mind to reach this state of peace is meditation. Meditation is the art of focusing the mind, calming the emotions, and gaining insight into the true nature of reality. Through meditation, we develop the capacity to observe our thoughts without becoming entangled in them. We learn to let go of the stories and narratives the mind constantly spins, allowing us to rest in the stillness that lies beyond them. There are many forms of meditation, but all share the same underlying purpose: to bring the mind into a state of clarity, concentration, and peace. The Buddha emphasized the importance of right concentration, which is one of the elements of the Eightfold Path. This is the ability to focus the mind single-pointedly on a single object, whether it is the breath, a mantra, or the body's sensations. When the mind is concentrated, it becomes calm. And when the mind is calm, peace naturally arises. Meditation doesn't only train us to concentrate, it also helps us develop insight. Insight, or vipassana, is the ability to see things as they truly are, without the distortion of craving, aversion, or ignorance. As we gain insight into the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and non-self nature of all things, we develop a deeper understanding of why we suffer and how to end that suffering. The Buddha described the mind as being like a river. In its natural state, the river flows gently and smoothly. But when disturbed by external forces, it becomes turbulent and chaotic. Meditation and mindfulness are the means by which we calm the waters of the mind. When the waters are calm, the river reflects the sky clearly. Similarly, when the mind is at peace, it reflects the world around us with clarity, free from distortion. But training for peace doesn't end with meditation. It extends into every aspect of our lives. The Buddha taught that the practice of peace must be applied not only on the cushion but in our actions, words, and thoughts throughout the day. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood are all part of the process of creating peace in the world. By speaking kindly, acting ethically, and living in harmony with others, we cultivate an environment that supports our inner peace. The more we train the mind to be peaceful, the more it becomes our natural state. It's not about forcing the mind to be still, it's about creating the conditions for peace to arise naturally. The Buddha compared this process to a potter shaping clay. With patience and skill, the potter shapes the clay into a beautiful vessel. Similarly, we shape the mind through consistent practice, mindfulness, and ethical living. The peace that the Buddha speaks of is not an abstract or unattainable ideal. It is a very real state that can be cultivated by anyone willing to put in the effort. The path to peace is not a destination to reach, but a journey to walk, a journey that unfolds gradually as we let go of the habits that disturb our peace and cultivate the qualities that lead to lasting freedom. Part 9. The illusion of innate nature and the freedom of self-determination. As we approach the final stages of the Buddha's teachings, we confront one of the most profound and often misunderstood concepts, the illusion of innate nature. The Buddha warned us not to fall into the trap of believing in any fixed or permanent self, whether it is a belief in an inherent Buddha nature, an inherent good nature, or a permanent essence of who we are. This belief in a fixed nature, he taught, binds us to suffering, because it prevents us from recognizing our freedom. For many centuries, various traditions have fostered the idea that everyone possesses an innate Buddha nature, an essence within us that is already enlightened, waiting to be uncovered. While this idea may seem comforting, it can actually become a barrier on the path to awakening. The Buddha himself never advocated for the belief in an intrinsic Buddha nature. Instead, he emphasized that liberation is a process of transformation, one that requires active effort and self-determination, not merely the discovery of an innate, predetermined state. The notion of an innate Buddha nature, for example, implies that we are born with some inherent quality that is already awakened or pure. But the Buddha was clear, awakening does not come from uncovering something that is already inside of us, but from actively cultivating wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness. This cultivation is an ongoing process, a path that we walk with each decision, each moment of awareness. To better understand this, let's imagine a beautiful garden. If you believe the flowers in the garden will bloom without any care, you may be waiting forever. But if you tend to the soil, water the plants, and remove the weeds, the garden will flourish. The Buddha's path is like this process of cultivation. It is not about discovering a hidden garden inside us, but about nurturing the seeds of wisdom and virtue until they fully bloom. And this process requires ongoing effort and mindfulness, not reliance on some pre-existing nature. When we believe in a fixed essence or an inherent Buddha nature, we may also fall into the trap of complacency. We may think, since I have this Buddha nature, I don't need to do anything. I am already awakened. This mindset can keep us stuck in ignorance, because it removes the urgency and motivation to practice. We may neglect the hard work required to truly awaken. Furthermore, believing in an innate Buddha nature can also trap us in a dualistic mindset, the belief that we are either good or bad, pure or impure. In truth, these labels are fleeting and ultimately meaningless. The Buddha taught that our nature is not fixed, but shaped by our choices and actions. There is no permanent self or Buddha within us. Instead, we are a process, constantly changing, evolving, and becoming. This freedom from believing in an inherent self or fixed nature is incredibly liberating. It means that we are not prisoners of our past, we are not doomed by past actions, experiences, or the conditioning of our mind. Instead, we are free to shape our future. We can choose how to respond to the world, how to cultivate wisdom, and how to let go of attachments. This freedom to choose, moment by moment, is what leads us toward true liberation. In fact, the Buddha's teachings on self-determination and the absence of a fixed nature can be seen as the heart of his message. The path to awakening is not about discovering some hidden, inherent nature, but about taking responsibility for our actions and thoughts. It is about recognizing that we are the creators of our own suffering, and, likewise, We are the creators of our own liberation. When we realize that we are not defined by any inherent nature or identity, we unlock a profound sense of freedom. We are no longer bound by the expectations we place on ourselves, nor by the identities others impose on us. We are free to evolve, to change, and to choose the path that leads us toward peace, wisdom, and compassion. Part 10. Exploring true freedom through the process of fabrication. The Buddha's teachings. One of the most profound ideas is that freedom arises from understanding the process of fabrication. This refers to the way our minds create and shape our experiences of the world. All of our perceptions, emotions, and reactions are not inherent qualities, but products of the mind's fabrications, mental constructions influenced by our attachments, desires, and ignorance. Understanding this process is key to achieving liberation because it reveals that we are not victims of our circumstances, but active participants in the creation of our experiences. The Buddha often spoke about the mind's tendency to fabricate its own reality. We tend to create mental stories, narratives, and identities based on what we want or fear. And these fabrications shape how we experience the world. These stories are often rooted in our past experiences, our desires, and our misconceptions. They form the lens through which we interpret everything around us. And because we are so deeply attached to these fabrications, we believe them to be real. However, the Buddha's teachings show us that these fabrications are not fixed truths, they are transient and can be changed. This understanding of mental fabrication is liberating because it means that we are not bound by the world as we perceive it. We are free to change our perspective, to stop identifying with the stories we tell ourselves, and to stop holding on to the attachments and reactions that fuel these stories. To explain this, consider a simple example. Imagine you are walking through a forest at night. The shadows and shapes in the dark may appear threatening or ominous. But when daylight comes, the same shapes that seemed threatening are revealed to be harmless trees or rocks. The difference between the night and day experience is not the reality of the objects, but the mind's interpretation of them. The mind, in its ignorance, creates fear where there is none. When the light of mindfulness and insight shines on these fabrications, we see the truth. They are empty of inherent danger. This process of fabrication happens in every moment of our lives. We fabricate our sense of self, our fears, our desires, and our relationships with others. We interpret every experience through the lens of our past conditioning and mental habits. But when we begin to see these fabrications as they are, just mental constructions, we free ourselves from being trapped by them. Freedom, therefore, lies in recognizing that we have the power to change how we interpret our experiences. This doesn't mean denying reality, it means seeing it more clearly. The mind often fabricates a self-image that is tied to past experiences or future hopes. These fabrications form the foundation of our attachment to things, people, and even to the very idea of who we are. But when we see through these illusions, we are no longer bound by them. This understanding is crucial for the path to awakening. Once we recognize that our experiences are shaped by mental fabrications, we can begin to break free from the chains of ignorance and attachment. We no longer have to be ruled by the stories we tell ourselves or the emotions we fabricate. Instead, we can practice letting go of these fabrications, one by one. The Buddha's insight into freedom through seeing the process of fabrication is not a call to disengage from life, but to engage with it fully and mindfully. By understanding the mind's tendencies to fabricate, we gain insight into the nature of suffering and its cessation. We see that our suffering is not caused by external events, but by our attachment to the mental constructions we create around those events. When we stop clinging to these fabrications, suffering naturally fades away. Part 11. The Journey of Awakening and the Ever-Present Choice. The path to awakening is not a destination, it is an ongoing journey. As we walk the path of wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, we come to realize that every moment is an opportunity for transformation. The Buddha's teachings remind us that we are never truly stuck, we always have the power to choose how we respond to life's challenges and experiences. Every day, we face countless choices. Will we choose the path of mindfulness and wisdom? Or will we react out of habit and ignorance? Will we choose peace over conflict, understanding over judgment, love over fear? These choices, though they may seem small, have a profound impact on the direction of our lives. They shape our minds, our hearts, and ultimately, our experience of the world. The Buddha taught that awakening is not something that happens once and for all, it is a continuous process of awakening to deeper levels of truth. With each step on the path, we move closer to the realization of our true nature, a nature that is not bound by the illusions of self, ego, or attachment. This is the essence of true freedom, the ability to recognize that we are not defined by our past, our desires, or our circumstances. We are free to choose how we respond, how we grow, and how we live in alignment with the truth. And this journey of awakening is not something we do alone. The Buddha's teachings offer a community of practice, a sangha, where we can support one another in our efforts to awaken. Whether through meditation, reflection, or simply being present for others, we walk this path together, each contributing to the collective wisdom and peace. In every moment, we are presented with the choice to awaken, to see things as they truly are, without the veil of ignorance or attachment. And the more we choose this path, the more it becomes our natural way of being. The Buddha didn't promise that awakening would be easy, but he did promise that it would bring an end to suffering and lead us to a state of peace that surpasses anything the world can offer. Call to action: join us on the path to wisdom. As you reflect on these teachings, remember that the journey of awakening is ongoing and accessible to everyone. Whether you're just starting or have been on this path for many years, each step forward brings you closer to the peace, wisdom, and freedom that the Buddha spoke of. If you've found value in today's teachings, consider subscribing to our channel, The Path to Buddhist Wisdom, and joining our growing community. Here, we explore the profound wisdom of the Buddha, share stories of personal transformation, and support each other on this shared journey toward awakening. By subscribing, you'll receive regular updates, meditative guidance, and insights that can help you deepen your practice and understanding of Buddhist teachings. Together, we can walk the path to wisdom, peace, and true freedom. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey of awakening together.